The carriage stopped at a gate Isolde Warrick had never seen before, and she knew without being told that her life as she had lived it was over. The driver did not speak. He had not spoken for the full 3 hours of the journey, though she had tried once, twice, to ask him how much farther, to ask what sort of man waited at the end of this road. He had only looked at her with something that might have been pity, or might have been relief that he was not the one being handed over, and had snapped the reins. Now the gate groaned open on its iron hinges, and the carriage rolled forward into a drive lined with poplars so tall they blocked out the early morning sky. Frost glittered on the gravel. Somewhere beyond the trees, a raven called once and then was silent. Isolde sat very straight on the worn leather seat, her gloved hands folded in her lap, and refused to let herself tremble. She was 23 years old. She had been sold for £14,000, 3 head of cattle, and the forgiveness of a loan that had been killing her father for 7 years. She did not know her new husband's name. She did not know his face. She had been told only that he was a wealthy recluse, a gentleman of considerable means who preferred the country to society and had agreed, for reasons unexplained, to take a ruined baronet's eldest daughter off his hands. Her mother had wept for 3 days. Her younger sister Philippa had refused to come out of her room the morning Isolde left, pressing a letter beneath Isolde's door that she had not yet found the courage to read. Her father had not looked at her as she climbed into the carriage. He had stood at the window of his study with his back to the drive, and Isolde had understood, with a clarity that had almost broken her, that he could not bear to watch what he had done. She had not wept. She had promised herself that. The carriage rolled to a halt before a house that rose from the mist like something carved out of the hillside itself. Gray stone weathered to silver, long windows reflecting nothing, ivy climbing the west wall in a pattern so old it seemed to have grown into the mortar. Ravensmere, the driver had called it once, the only word he had spoken the entire journey. Ravensmere. It sounded like a grave. A footman opened the carriage door. Isolde took a breath, lifted her chin, and stepped down onto the frost-hardened gravel with the composure of a woman walking into a cathedral. If this was to be her life now, she would walk into it on her own 2 feet. She would not be carried. She would not be dragged. She would not give her father, wherever he sat in whatever study, the satisfaction of having broken her. The front doors opened before she reached them, and a tall, narrow woman in black emerged. Housekeeper, Isolde guessed, from the ring of keys at her belt. Her face was not unkind, but it was careful, the face of a woman who had learned long ago to give away nothing. Miss Warrick. Mrs. Warrick, Isolde corrected quietly. By the contract signed yesterday. Something flickered across the older woman's features. A softening, perhaps, or a warning. Forgive me, madam. I am Mrs. Finch. I manage the household. His Grace asked that you be brought directly to the east drawing room. He wishes to receive you himself. His Grace. The words did not register for a full, absurd second. Isolde kept walking, her boots crunching on the gravel, her chin still lifted. His Grace. That was the address of a duke. Her father had not sold her to a reclusive gentleman. Her father had sold her to a duke. I beg your pardon, she said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. Did you say, His Grace is waiting, madam? This way, please. Isolde followed because there was nothing else to do. Her mind raced as she walked through the vaulted entrance hall, past portraits darkened with age, past suits of armor that had stood longer than her family's name had existed. A duke. A duke. Her father had known. He had looked her in the eye across the breakfast table and told her she was to marry a country gentleman of good fortune who preferred privacy, and he had sold her instead to a duke. Which meant either her father had been desperate enough to lie to her about the magnitude of what he had arranged, or someone had lied to him. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Mrs. Finch stopped before a pair of tall mahogany doors and laid her hand briefly, warningly, on Isolde's sleeve. A word, madam, before you go in. His Grace has not received a guest in his private rooms in nearly 4 years. He does not suffer noise or sudden movements. When you speak, speak clearly, and from where you are standing. Do not approach him unless he invites it. And do not, under any circumstances, pity him. Isolde stared at her. I don't understand. You will. Mrs. Finch knocked twice on the door, pushed it open, and stepped aside. Your Grace, Mrs. Warrick has arrived. For a long moment, Isolde could not make her feet move. The room beyond was beautiful and terribly still. Long windows flooded it with pale morning light, falling across a carpet the color of old wine, across bookshelves that reached to the ceiling, across a great stone hearth where a fire burned low. And in a high-backed chair beside that fire sat a man. He did not rise. He did not turn his head. He sat with his long hands folded upon the arms of the chair, his shoulders squared like a soldier at attention, his face tilted very slightly toward the sound of the opening door. He was younger than she had expected, somewhere in his middle 30s, perhaps, though something in his bearing made him seem older. Dark hair, cut severely short in a way that was years out of fashion. A jaw that had been sharpened by too little food and too many nights of insufficient sleep. A faint scar running along the left side of his brow, disappearing into the hairline. He was dressed in black, impeccably, as though he had been waiting all morning. And his eyes were open, gray-green, the color of the sea in winter, fixed on the space just above her left shoulder. Not quite meeting her face, not quite looking at her at all. Isolde's breath caught in her throat, and she understood, in a single devastating rush, what Mrs. Finch had meant. He was blind. "Come in, Mrs. Warrick," the Duke said. His voice was low and surprisingly gentle. Not the voice of a man who intended cruelty. But there was something held very carefully in it, some rigid thing, as though he were balancing a cup of boiling water on the back of his hand and did not dare move. Isolde stepped across the threshold. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. "You did not expect me to be sightless," he said. It was not a question. She opened her mouth, closed it. She had promised herself that she would not lie in this house. Whatever else was taken from her, she would keep her truth. "No, Your Grace. I did not." "Did your father tell you nothing?" "My father told me you were a gentleman of means who preferred the country. He did not tell me you were a duke. He did not tell me of your injury. I came here knowing nothing but your estate's direction." A silence. She watched him absorb this, watched something flicker across his face and be suppressed so quickly she could not name it. "Then he has done you a second injury on top of the first," the Duke said quietly, "for which I can only apologize. Please, sit." He gestured, precisely, to a chair across from his own. Isolde realized, with a strange tightening in her chest, that he had known exactly where the chair was, that every object in this room was placed where he could find it without thinking, and that he had likely rehearsed this audience a dozen times in his head before she had arrived. She sat. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She did not look away from him, though she knew he could not see her doing so. "My name," he said, "is Alaric Thorne. I am the 9th Duke of Ravensmere. The contract signed between your father and my solicitor is legally binding, and you are, as of yesterday, my wife. I imagine you have a great many questions. I will answer what I am able. What I cannot answer, I will tell you so, rather than lie." "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "What would you ask me first, Mrs. Warrick?" She thought for a long moment. "Of all the questions, why me? Why now? What happened to your sight? Are you cruel? Are you kind? Will you be patient with me? Will I ever see my sister again?" 100 questions, each more terrifying than the last. She settled on the one that could be answered most simply. "Why did you agree to this marriage, Your Grace?" A muscle moved in his jaw. "Because my mother is dying," he said, "and she wished to see me married before she did. Because I have no heir, and the title will pass to a cousin I despise if I do not produce one. Because your father's debt to my estate was considerable, and my solicitor suggested that forgiveness of it in exchange for a daughter's hand was a cleaner resolution than the court's. And because," here his voice dropped, almost too low to hear, "I am told you were known, in your county, for being a woman who did not flinch." Isolde felt the blood leave her face. "I am sorry. My solicitor made inquiries. He spoke to your vicar, your former governess, 2 of your father's tenants. They all said the same thing. That Miss Warrick did not flinch. Not when the mill burned. Not when her mother fell ill with fever. Not when the creditors began to come to the door." He tilted his head, very slightly, as though trying to read a face he could not see. "I did not want a wife who would weep when she looked at me. I wanted a wife who would not flinch." She did not know what to say to that. She did not know whether to be furious or to weep, and because she could not decide, she did neither. You have not flinched yet, he observed quietly. Though I heard your breath catch when you came in. I am sorry. Don't be. Something that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. I was bracing for a scream. Isolde exhaled, slowly, and found that her hands were trembling in her lap. She pressed them flat against her knees until they stopped. Your Grace, she said. May I ask how it happened? My sight. Yes. He did not answer at once. He turned his face back toward the fire, and for a moment she could see him in profile, the sharp, clean line of his jaw, the scar at his temple, the way his throat worked as he swallowed something down. I was at Badajoz, he said. You will have heard of the siege. Yes. I do not speak of it. But you should know that much, since you are to be my wife, and the servants will tell you a dozen different lies if I do not tell you the truth. I was a major in the 43rd. My men went over a wall I had ordered them over. A great many of them did not come back. I came back. A fragment of shell took my sight 2 days later, in the street fighting after the breach, but that is not the wound I carry. Do you understand the difference, Mrs. Warrick? She thought she did. Yes, she said quietly. I understand. He let out a breath. It was a small sound, but she heard in it something she had not expected. Relief. As though he had been afraid she would make him explain further, and was grateful that she had not. Then we understand each other, I think, on the most important point. He raised his head again. I will not ask you to love me, Mrs. Warrick. I am not so foolish as that. I will ask only that you honor the contract, that you bear me an heir if God is willing, and that you conduct yourself as the mistress of this house. In exchange, you will have my protection, my name, and whatever freedom I am able to grant you. Your sister may visit as often as you wish. Your mother may be sent funds. Your father, he paused. Your father will receive no further kindness from me, but neither will I pursue him. That is my offer. Do you accept it? I have already accepted it, she said. Yesterday, in my father's study, when I signed. You signed under duress. Yes. Then I am asking you now, in the absence of duress, whether you accept it. If you do not, you may leave this house tomorrow morning. I will tear up the contract. Your father's debt will remain forgiven. You will go wherever you wish, with whatever funds you require, and you will never see me again. That is the other offer. Choose which you prefer. For a long moment, Isolde could not speak. She stared at this man. This blind, upright, terrible man, with his hands folded on the arms of his chair and his face turned carefully toward the fire so that he would not seem to be staring at her through eyes that could not see. She had come through the door expecting cruelty or greed or the dull indifference of a purchaser inspecting his purchase. She had not expected this. She had not expected to be offered, in her first hour in this house, the one thing her father had refused her. A choice. Why? She said, and her voice was not quite steady. Why would you offer me that, Your Grace? You have paid a great deal for me. Because I was sold once myself, Mrs. Warrick. Not for money. For duty. I was sold by my father into a war I did not wish to fight, and it cost me my sight and a great many men I loved. I know what it is to be bought. He turned his face toward her, and though his eyes did not find hers, his stillness was absolute. I will not do that to another person, not even to save my line. Isolde discovered that her eyes were wet. She blinked, fiercely, and the tears did not fall. I accept, Your Grace, she said. Freely. You are certain? Yes. Very well. He inclined his head. Then welcome to Ravensmere, Mrs. Warrick. He rose. He did it with such care, such precise economy of motion, that she realized for the first time how tall he was. Taller than her father. Taller than any man she had danced with in the sparse little assemblies of her county. He held out his hand, palm up, and waited. It took her a heartbeat to understand that he was offering, not demanding, that she could take his hand or not, as she chose. She rose and laid her fingers lightly in his. His hand closed over hers, and she felt the shock of it go up her arm. Not warmth precisely, something quieter. The feeling of being, for the first time in a very long while, acknowledged as a living thing. His thumb passed once, lightly, across her knuckles, as though he were committing the shape of her hand to memory. You have very cold fingers, he said. The carriage was cold. Mrs. Finch will bring tea. I should like you to dine with me tonight, if you are not too tired. I keep country hours. We sit down at 7. Yes, Your Grace. Alaric, I beg your pardon. When we are alone. You are my wife. I would rather you call me by my name than by my title. The title is a thing I inherited. The name is a thing I chose to keep." She hesitated. Then, very quietly, she said, "Alaric." Something passed across his face that she could not read. It was there and gone so quickly that she could not be sure she had seen it at all. But his hand tightened briefly over hers before he let her go, and when he sat down again, he did so with the air of a man who had survived something difficult. "Isolde," he said, testing it. "An unusual name. My grandmother's. I shall try to deserve it." She did not know what to say to that, either. She curtsied, though he could not see it, and Mrs. Finch came in to take her to her rooms, and the door closed behind her, and Isolde Warrick, now Duchess of Ravensmere, walked down a long gallery of portraits with her heart beating so hard she thought the ancestors on the walls must surely hear it. Her rooms were at the end of the east wing, 2 chambers joined by a dressing room, the windows looking out across the park to a lake that lay like a sheet of pewter under the morning sky. Mrs. Finch showed her the bell pulls, the wardrobe, the writing desk already supplied with paper and ink, the little door that connected, through a passage, to the Duke's own apartments. "His Grace has requested that the passage remain locked on your side," Mrs. Finch said, setting the key on the mantel. "For your comfort, madam, not for his." Isolde understood, though it took her a moment. He would not come to her. He would wait to be invited. He had given her, again, the one thing she had not known she could possess. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch." "You are welcome, madam." Mrs. Finch hesitated at the door. Her hand rested on the latch. Then, without turning, she said, "He is a good man, madam. I have served him since he was 12 years old. Whatever they told you in the village about him, it is not true. He is a good man, and he has been very alone." The door closed behind her before Isolde could answer. Isolde sat down on the edge of the bed. Her trunk had been carried up. It stood at the foot of the bed, still strapped. On top of it lay Philippa's letter, unopened. She had forgotten it. She had meant to read it on the road, and had not been able to bear it. She opened it now. "Dearest Isolde," Philippa had written, in the careful round hand of a girl of 17, "I cannot make Papa see what he has done. I cannot make Mama stop weeping long enough to listen. So I will tell you, and I hope you find this letter in time. The man they have sold you to is not a country gentleman. I heard Papa's solicitor speaking to our steward in the kitchen yard. He is a duke, Isolde, and he is blind. Papa knew. Papa has known the entire time. He said you would not go if you knew, and that it was better this way. I would have gone with you if I could have. I would have walked there beside your carriage. Please write the moment you are able. Please tell me you are safe. I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this world, and I will not forgive Papa for this, not ever. Your sister, always and always, P." Isolde read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it very carefully, pressed it to her lips, and placed it in the drawer of the writing desk. She did not weep. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out across the pewter lake. Somewhere beneath this roof, in a drawing room full of carefully placed furniture, a blind man sat beside a fire and waited for 7 o'clock, and she had promised him she would come. She had promised him she would not flinch. She went to the bell pull and rang for hot water. She would bathe. She would dress. She would go down to dinner tonight in the best gown she had, the dove-gray silk that had been her mother's, and she would keep her promise. That was the one thing, it seemed, that she could still do. When the maid came, bringing the copper can of steaming water and fresh linen towels draped over her arm, she found the new Duchess of Ravensmere standing at the window with her chin up and her shoulders square, and she curtsied more deeply than was strictly required. Word had already begun to move through the servants' hall. The Duke had come out of his study for the first time in a season. He had asked for the fire to be built up in the east drawing room. He had given an order for dinner for 2. The house, which had been sleeping, was beginning to wake. The dove-gray silk was not a young woman's gown. It had been her mother's, cut down, the sleeves let out twice and the hem taken up once, and it carried a faint scent of lavender from the chest where it had lain for most of a year. Isolde stood before the long glass in her dressing room while the maid, a quiet girl named Betsy, pinned up her hair with hands that trembled only slightly. "Forgive me, madam," Betsy murmured, fumbling with a pin. "It has been some years since I dressed a lady for dinner. Mrs. Finch said I should be your maid, if you find me suitable." "You are suitable, Betsy," Isolde said. "I do not require very much." In the glass, her own face looked back at her, pale and composed, the faint freckles across her nose more visible than usual in the candlelight. She was not beautiful. She had known that since she was 15. She had what her mother called a sensible face, a countenance that improved on acquaintance but had never yet turned a head at a ball. Her hair was a plain brown, her eyes a darker shade of the same, her figure thin from a long winter of small meals. She had no illusions about what she would have looked like to the Duke of Ravensmere, had the Duke of Ravensmere been able to look at her. And yet tonight, for the first time in her life, she was dressing for a man who could not see her. It was a strange thought. She turned it over while Betsy set the last pin. He would not know her gown was made over. He would not know her slippers had been re-dyed. He would not know that the pearl at her throat was paste. He would know her only by her voice, by her footsteps, by the scent of the lavender water she had rinsed her wrists in, by what she said, by what she did not say. She was terrified and, in a way she could not account for, oddly free. "Thank you, Betsy. That will do." The dining room was lit with more candles than Isolde had expected. 2 great branches on the table, a pair of sconces on the wall, a fire in the hearth. The Duke was already standing at his place at the head of the long table. He had changed for dinner into black evening clothes, and he turned his face toward the door as she entered, the way a man might turn toward a sound he had been waiting for. "Mrs. Warrick." "Alaric." She said it quietly, testing it again. "Good evening." Something eased in his shoulders. "You came. I said I would." "People," he said, "have said a great many things to me, Mrs. Warrick. Not all of them have proven reliable." He held out his hand, and this time she went to him without hesitation and let him lead her the length of the table to her place at his right hand. He pulled out her chair himself. The footman, she saw, had been trained to stand back and not intervene. A single small act, but it told her a great deal about this house. The Duke of Ravensmere did the work of a blind man in front of his staff, in front of his wife, without shame. She sat. He took his own seat. "I am told," he said, "that you are wearing gray." Isolde's hand paused on her napkin. "Who told you?" "Betsy. She came down to the kitchen and told Mrs. Finch, who told me. Forgive me. It was not meant to be intrusive. I wished to know so that I could." He stopped. His mouth tightened. "So that I could picture you." "Oh," she said. "Does it trouble you?" "No. It is only," she laughed once, a small startled sound that surprised them both. "It is only that no man has ever wished to picture me before. I am not much to look at, Your Grace." "Alaric. Alaric. That is very certainly not true," he said quietly. "But I will not press the point, since I cannot prove it." The footman began to serve, and Isolde discovered, as the first course was set before her, that she was hungry. Not the polite hunger of a young lady at a dinner party, but the bone-deep hunger of a woman who had not eaten properly in 3 days. The soup was simple and hot, and very good. She ate it slowly, because she had been raised to, but she ate all of it. He did not speak while they ate the first course. She understood, after a few minutes, that he was listening, to the clink of her spoon, to the rustle of her gown, to the small breath she took after she swallowed. He was building her up out of sound, the way a sculptor builds up a figure out of clay, and she found she did not mind. It was the closest thing to being seen that she had felt in a long time. Between the first course and the second, he said, "Tell me about your sister." Isolde's throat tightened. "Philippa," she said. "She is 17. She wrote me a letter. She would not forgive my father for what he did." "Good," he said. "Neither shall I." She had not expected that. She looked at him across the candlelight, at the stark lines of his face, at the way his fingers rested motionless against the stem of his wine glass, and she understood that he had meant it. He was, in this moment, more angry on her behalf than her own mother had been. It was a strange thing to be defended by a stranger. "Tell me about her," he said again, gently. So she told him. About Philippa's laugh, which was too loud for drawing rooms. About the way Philippa had taught herself Italian from a battered grammar because she wanted to read Dante. About the summer Philippa had fallen out of the apple tree and broken her wrist and refused to cry because she had not wanted their father to know she had been climbing. She talked for longer than she had meant to, and when she finally stopped, embarrassed, she found that her plate had been cleared and a second course set before her, and she had not even noticed the footman come in. "Forgive me," she said. "I have run on." "You have not run on." He set down his glass. "You have told me something true. It is not a thing I hear often in this house." "Do the servants not speak to you truly?" The servants speak to me as they have been trained to speak to me. Kindly, carefully, as though I were a patient who might break. His mouth moved, not quite a smile. You are the first person in a very long while to simply speak. I am not certain I remember how to do it myself. You must be patient with me. I do not think I am in a position to be impatient with anyone, Alaric. You are in a very particular position, he said. You are my wife. You may be as impatient as you please. She could not help it. She laughed. It surprised her as much as it had the first time. She covered her mouth with her napkin, and she saw something shift in his face, something that was almost wonder, as though he had been listening for that sound his whole life, and had only just heard it. That is a good laugh, he said quietly. You should use it more often. She did not know how to answer him. So she picked up her knife and fork and ate her pheasant instead, and he seemed content to let the silence come back, and for a long while there was only the small music of cutlery on plates and the fire murmuring in the hearth. The days after that first dinner moved with a rhythm Isolde had not expected to find in such a house. She had come to Ravensmere braced for a marriage of locked doors and averted faces. For long silent meals and rooms she was not permitted to enter. Instead she found a house that was quietly, almost shyly, waking up around her. Dust sheets came off in the yellow drawing room. A piano she had not known was tuned. A spaniel bitch with a white muzzle, who had apparently been exiled to the kitchen for 4 years because his grace had said he could not bear the sound of her toenails on the parquet, was restored to her old place on the hearth rug, and took to following Isolde from room to room with an expression of almost religious gratitude. Alaric did not pretend to be less wounded than he was. He did not pretend he could see. He did not, on the other hand, behave like a man who wished to be pitied. He rose early, rode every morning with a groom at his stirrup, worked with his steward from 10 until 1, and spent the afternoons in the library, where a young clerk named Hargrove read to him from the newspapers and the estate accounts. He took his tea at 4. He walked in the park at 5, weather permitting, with a long ash stick that he did not lean on so much as used to read the ground. He dressed for dinner. He sat down at 7, and every night he asked her to sit with him in the library after the meal, and every night she went. The library was the most beautiful room in the house. 3 stories of books, with iron galleries running round the upper floors, and a fire that Mrs. Finch built up herself so that it threw warm light across the rugs. There was a chair on either side of the hearth. His chair. Her chair. Within the first week, it had become her chair. Someone had put a small footstool in front of it. Someone had set a branch of candles on the table beside it, with a little knife for trimming the wicks. She did not know who had done these things. She suspected Mrs. Finch. She knew, with a sudden certainty that ached in her chest, that Mrs. Finch had done them at Alaric's direction. She read to him at first because she did not know what else to do. She had offered it on the 3rd evening, shyly, because the silence between them had begun to feel like something she ought to fill, and because the volume of Cooper beside her chair had looked lonely on its table. "Would you like me to read, Alaric?" He had gone very still. "Yes," he had said. "Very much." So she read. Cooper first, because it was there. Then, as she grew bolder, whatever she found on the shelves that caught her interest. Travels in the Hebrides. A volume of Donne. Boswell's Life of Johnson, which made him laugh once so unexpectedly that the spaniel sat up and barked. She discovered, slowly, that he had been a great reader before the war, that he had lost that part of himself along with his sight, that Hargrove read him the necessary things, but that no one had read him a poem in 4 years. She discovered that when she read to him, he closed his eyes, and his face, which was ordinarily held so carefully still, softened into something unguarded and almost young. She discovered, too, that she liked the sound of her own voice when he was listening. It was not a thing she had known about herself. At home, she had been the quiet daughter, the sensible one, the one who did not put herself forward. Here, in this library, with this silent, attentive man in the other chair, she was someone who read Donne aloud after dinner and made a blind Duke laugh. On the 8th evening, she closed the book in her lap and said, "Alaric, will you tell me about Badajoz?" He did not answer at once. She watched the fire move over his face, watched the long fingers tighten once on the arm of his chair. "I told you I did not speak of it." "I know, and you ask anyway." "I do, because I have read to you every night for 8 nights, and I still do not know you. And because I think you have told no one, and it is poisoning you, Alaric. I can hear it in your voice when you pray. I can hear it in your voice when you do not pray, which is every night. A long silence. You listen to me pray? The walls are thin, and you kneel by the window. I can hear you through the passage. He laughed once, a broken little sound. Christ, I do not mean to intrude. She set the book aside. I only mean that I am your wife, and I would like to know the thing that hurts you. Not to fix it. I am not so arrogant as that. Only to know it. He was silent for a very long time. She watched his throat work. She watched his hand, the hand that had held hers on her first morning here, close into a fist on the arm of his chair, and then, slowly, open again. The wall was 40 feet high, he said. She did not move. She did not breathe. We went in at 10 at night. The engineers had made 2 breaches. The orders were to take the breaches and hold them till morning, whatever it cost. I had 112 men under my command. They were very young. Most of them had never been in a real action. They were frightened, and they sang to keep their courage up, and I remember thinking that I had never heard anything so beautiful in my life as those men singing in the dark before the bugle. We went over the wall. We got onto the glacis. We went down into the ditch, and the French had mined the ditch, and his voice did not break. It only went very flat. We lost 71 men in the ditch, Isolde. 71 of 112. I lost them because I had told them to go first. Because the orders said someone had to go first, and I had decided it would not be me. I stayed on the wall, and I watched them go. I watched them die. And when the shell fragment took my eyes 2 days later in the street fighting, I thought, well, this is a fair thing. This is very nearly fair. Isolde had put her hand over her mouth. I have not spoken of it, he said. Not to my mother. Not to my physician. Not to the chaplain. I have not spoken the number aloud before tonight. 71. I count them. That is what I do when I kneel by the window, Isolde. I do not pray. I count them. Alaric, do not tell me it was not my fault. Please. I cannot bear to hear it from you. She rose. She did not think about it. Her body moved before her mind did. She crossed the 3 steps between her chair and his, and she knelt down on the carpet in front of him, and she took his clenched hand between both of hers and opened it, finger by finger, and pressed his open palm against her own cheek. He made a sound, not a word, something smaller than a word. I will not tell you it was not your fault, she said, very quietly, into the warm cup of his hand. I will only tell you that I am here. I am here, Alaric, and I will be here tomorrow night, and the night after that. And you may count them to me instead of to the window, if you wish. I will listen. I will listen to every one. His other hand came up, trembling, and found her hair. He did not pull her toward him. He did not push her away. His fingers passed once, wonderingly, over the coil at the back of her head, over the ribbon Betsy had tied into it, over the small, warm curve of her ear. Isolde. Yes. You were not supposed to. He stopped. She could feel him breathing hard. You were not supposed to be kind to me. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. His thumb, very slowly, traced the line of her cheekbone and found the wetness there. You are crying. Yes. Why? Because 71 is a great many men, she said. And because you have been counting them alone for 4 years. And because no one should count that alone. He bent his head. His forehead came to rest against hers. For a long moment, they stayed like that, kneeling and sitting, her hands cupped around his thumb tracing the wet track on her face, the fire murmuring behind them, the spaniel sighing in her sleep on the rug. He did not kiss her. He was not ready, and she was not ready, and they both knew it. But when at last she rose and helped him to his feet, and he walked her to the door of her rooms himself, one hand resting very lightly on her elbow, because he had walked this corridor 1,000 times, but he had never walked it with her, and he stopped outside her door and raised her hand to his lips and pressed his mouth against her knuckles for a long quiet breath. Thank you, Isolde, he said. For what? For not flinching. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the great bed with the curtains drawn back and watched the moon move across the lake, and she tried to understand what had happened to her in the library, and she could not. She knew only that something had shifted in her chest that would not shift back, that the man on the other side of the locked passage door had become, in the space of 8 days, the most important person in her world. That when she had pressed his palm to her cheek, something in her had said this, simply, clearly, this, and would not be silenced. It was not sensible. It was not safe. She had known him 9 days. He was a blind duke who carried 71 dead men behind his eyes and who had not promised her love. She had promised herself, at 16, that she would not be a fool about a man. She had watched her mother be a fool about her father, and she had sworn she would not repeat it. She pressed her hands to her face in the dark and whispered, "Oh no," and did not know whether she was afraid or only astonished. In the morning a letter came from London. Mrs. Finch brought it up herself, on a small silver tray, and the set of her mouth told Isolde everything before she had broken the seal. It was addressed to His Grace, and it bore the crest of the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere. It came express, Mrs. Finch said. The writer has been given breakfast in the kitchen. His Grace is in the library. He asked that you be sent for when it arrived. Alaric was standing at the window when she came in. She had never seen him standing at a window before. He stood very straight, his head inclined toward the gray morning light as though he could still, some days, feel it on his face. "My mother," he said, without turning. "Yes. Read it to me, Isolde, if you will. I do not trust Hargrove with this one." She broke the seal. The paper was very fine, the handwriting cramped and urgent, not the hand of a servant but of the Dowager Duchess herself. She read it aloud, quietly, steadying her voice because she could feel the weight of each word as it left her mouth. "My dearest boy, the physicians tell me I have perhaps a fortnight, perhaps less. I will not lie to you, Alaric, as I have not lied to you since you were a child, and I will ask you now for the one thing I have asked of you since you came back from Spain, which is that you come to me in London. Bring your wife. I wish to meet her before I die. I wish to know that the thing I asked of you was not a cruelty. Do not delay. Come as soon as this letter reaches you. The house is ready. I love you. I have always loved you. Come." The room was very quiet. Alaric had not moved. His hand was on the window frame, white at the knuckles. "A fortnight," he said, "or less. Alaric, we will go today." "Today. The carriage can be ready in 2 hours. Mrs. Finch will see to your things. I should have gone a month ago. I should have gone when the first letter came. I kept thinking," his voice roughened. "I kept thinking I had more time." "We will go," Isolde said. "Of course we will go. I will be ready." He turned his face toward her at last, and she saw that the careful stillness had cracked, that his mouth was trembling very faintly, that he was, in this moment, not a duke at all, but only a grown man who was about to lose his mother. "Isolde," he said. "Yes. I cannot do this alone. You are not alone." He reached for her, unsteadily, and she went to him, and his arms came around her shoulders, and he held her the way a drowning man holds onto a spar, his face pressed into the crown of her hair, his whole body shaking once, and then stilling. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. She stood in the circle of his arms, in a cold library in front of a gray window, and she understood that she had already begun to love him, and that whatever happened in London, she would not be going home again. This was home. He was home. She had been married 9 days, and she was already lost, and she did not, in that moment, want to be found. The journey to London took 2 days. They traveled through a landscape growing steadily colder, the hedgerows bare, the sky the color of wet slate. Alaric slept very little. Isolde woke twice in the inn where they broke their journey, each time because she had heard him moving in the adjoining room, pacing the length of it, the floorboards groaning under him. The second time she had gone to the connecting door and pressed her forehead against it. "Alaric," she had said softly, "come to bed. You will be no use to her if you do not sleep." The pacing had stopped. After a long moment he had said, through the door, "Will you stay until I do?" "Yes." She had sat down against the door with her dressing gown wrapped around her, and she had listened to him move about, and to the sound of him finally lying down, and to his breathing as it slowly evened. She had stayed until she was sure he was asleep. Then she had risen, stiff with cold, and gone back to her own bed, and she had lain awake herself until the first gray light. They reached London at dusk on the second day. The town house was on Grosvenor Square. It rose out of the winter twilight like a pale-fronted ship, windows lit, doors opening before the carriage had quite stopped. A butler Isolde had never seen before came down the steps, and a stiff, gray-haired woman who must have been the dowager's companion, and behind them, just visible in the lit hall, a physician in a dark coat with his hand on the banister. "How is she?" Alaric said, as the steps were let down. "Holding, Your Grace," the physician said. "She has been asking for you since noon. The laudanum helps her sleep, but she has refused it since your letter came. She wished to be lucid when you arrived. Take me up, Your Grace. May I recommend, take me up now, doctor." Isolde followed, her hand tucked into the crook of Alaric's arm because he had asked her, quietly, in the carriage, to stay close. The staircase was long. The house smelled faintly of camphor and of the particular cold flowers that people bring to a sick room. At the top of the stairs, the physician stood aside, and Alaric stopped for a moment and drew a long breath, and then walked into his mother's bedchamber with his chin up and his wife on his arm. The Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere was propped against a bank of pillows in a great carved bed. She had been a tall woman once. You could see it still in the length of her hands where they lay on the counterpane. Her hair was white, braided back, and her eyes were her son's eyes, exactly, gray-green as a winter sea. Only these eyes could see, and they fixed on Isolde the moment she came through the door. "My boy," she whispered. "Mama." Alaric crossed the room. He knew the way. The bed had not moved in 20 years. He knelt down beside it and laid his forehead against her hand, and the dowager closed her eyes and did not speak for a long moment, her fingers moving in his dark hair, slowly, as though she were memorizing the shape of his head. "You came," she said at last. "You called. I was not certain. I have not been a good mother these last years, Alaric. I pushed you too hard. I married you to a stranger because I was afraid of dying without seeing you settled. I asked a thing of you that—" She stopped. Her eyes opened and found Isolde where she stood just inside the door. "Come here, child. Let me see you." Isolde came forward. She did not know what she had expected. She had imagined an imperious old woman, perhaps, or a woman eaten up with grief. She had not expected this steady, piercing gaze. She had not expected the way the dowager's eyes moved over her face, slowly, carefully, the way a surveyor looks at a piece of land. "Isolde Warrick," the dowager said. "Or is it Thorne now?" "Thorne, Your Grace." "Come closer, Thorne." Isolde knelt down, because it seemed the only thing to do, and the dowager took her hand in one of her long, cold ones, and held it, and looked at her for a long, slow moment in silence. "You are not pretty," the dowager said at last. "No, madam." "Good. Pretty women flinch. I told my solicitor to find a plain girl with iron in her. He tells me he found one. Is he right?" Isolde met the old woman's gaze. She did not let go of her hand. "I do not know, madam, whether I have iron in me. I only know that I have not run away yet." Something moved at the corner of the dowager's mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was something older and wearier and more approving. "You love my son already," she said. "Do not bother to deny it. I have had 3 months in bed with nothing to do but look at faces. Yours is not a face that hides what it feels, child. And he loves you, or he is beginning to. I can hear it in the way he said your name on the stairs. He has not said a woman's name like that in a great many years." Isolde's face burned. She could not look at Alaric. She could not look anywhere except at the cold hand holding hers. "Madam, hush. I am dying. I may say what I like." The dowager turned her head, with effort, toward her son. "Alaric, come. Put your hand on hers. On her hand, on mine. I want to feel you both." He came. He knelt on the other side of the bed and laid his long palm over his mother's, where it covered Isolde's, and the three of them stayed like that, with their hands stacked upon the counterpane, for a long, quiet moment. "I will not ask you to promise me anything, Alaric," the dowager said. "I have asked you for enough in your life. I will only say this. I was wrong to push you into the army. I have known it since the day you came home to me with your eyes bandaged. I have not said it, because I did not know how. I am saying it now. I was wrong. I am sorry. Forgive me if you are able." Alaric's head bent. Isolde felt the tremor that went through him. "Mama, say it, my boy. Do not let me go without hearing you say it." "I forgive you." His voice broke on the second word. "Of course I forgive you. Of course." "Good." The dowager closed her eyes. Her fingers pressed Isolde's hand once, and then, carefully, let go. "Take her home to Ravensmere, Alaric. Make her a duchess. Give her children if you are able, and love her if you are not. I am going to sleep now. I am very tired. Come tomorrow, Both of you. Come early. She did not wake again. She died at 4:30 in the morning, without opening her eyes, her son holding her right hand and her son's wife holding her left. The physician came in at 6 and drew the sheet up over her face, and Alaric sat on the floor beside the bed for an hour afterward without speaking, and Isolde sat with him, her shoulder against his, and did not try to make him speak. They buried the dowager in the family vault at Ravensmere 2 weeks later, under a cold iron sky, and the whole county came. Isolde stood beside her husband in her black gown and held his hand through her glove, and she did not let go of it even when the earl of the neighboring county murmured, with his eyes sliding past her, that she might wish to stand aside so that the duke might walk behind the coffin with his cousin. Alaric had only tightened his hand on hers and walked behind the coffin with his wife and said nothing. She learned that night the name of the cousin. She learned it because Hargrove, the young clerk, came to her private sitting room after the funeral supper and asked in a low, apologetic voice whether he might have a word. He closed the door. He stood with his hands behind his back like a schoolboy about to confess a theft. "Madam, forgive me. His Grace does not wish to trouble you with certain matters, but I believe you ought to know. Go on, Mr. Hargrove. The heir presumptive, Lord Mortimer Thorne, His Grace's first cousin on his father's side." Hargrove swallowed. "He has come down from London for the funeral. He has been here 3 days. He has been speaking, madam, to a great many people, to the servants, to the tenants, to the physician who attended the dowager. He has been asking questions, madam, about His Grace's health, about His Grace's fitness to manage the estate, about—" Hargrove dropped his eyes, "about the consummation of the marriage." Isolde went very cold. "I beg your pardon. He has suggested, madam, to more than one person, that a marriage which has not produced an heir within 12 months may be set aside on grounds of non-consummation. He has suggested that a blind man cannot be expected till—" Hargrove stopped. His face was scarlet. "Forgive me, madam. He has been suggesting, in short, that His Grace is not capable of being a husband, that the marriage is a sham, and that the title should pass to the nearest male heir of sound body, himself." The room was very still. "Does Alaric know?" "No, madam. He does not. I thought it best to come to you first." Isolde stood up. She was surprised to find that her legs held her. She walked to the window. Outside, the park lay under a thin crust of snow, and the moon was coming up over the lake. And somewhere in this house her husband was sitting with his mother's favorite shawl in his lap and grieving, and his cousin was going from room to room measuring the walls. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove." "Madam, what? You will say nothing to His Grace?" "Not yet. I must think." "Madam, good night, Mr. Hargrove." He left. She stood at the window for a long time. Her breath frosted the glass. She understood several things at once, and each of them was worse than the last. She understood that the marriage had not been consummated, and that anyone who wished to contest it could do so with reasonable hope of success. She understood that Lord Mortimer Thorne had come to this funeral not to mourn, but to harvest. She understood that if he set the marriage aside, she would be sent home to her father, who had already sold her once and would be only too willing to sell her again, and Alaric would be stripped of the one thing he had thought he could keep: the house, the name, the tenants who depended upon him, the shape of the life he had built out of the ruins of Badajoz. She understood that the law was not on their side, that a cousin with a good solicitor and a willing witness could make a case, that if Alaric were declared unfit, or if the marriage were declared void, there was nothing in the wide world that Isolde Thorne could do to stop it. She understood, finally, that she had a choice, that she could go to Alaric tonight, that she could walk through the passage that had been locked every night of her marriage, that she could turn the key on her own side, that she could knock and say whatever she needed to say, and that he would understand what she was asking, and he would not refuse her. She understood that she wanted to, that she had wanted to for days. And she understood, with a grief so deep it felt like cold water closing over her head, that she could not. Because if she went to him tonight, of all nights, with his mother 3 days in the ground and his cousin's threat hanging over them both, he would know. He would know that she had done it out of fear, out of strategy, out of a desperate effort to fortify their marriage against a legal attack. He would know, and it would poison everything that had passed between them in the library, every night she had read to him, every time she had pressed his palm against her cheek. He would think she had come to him out of duty. He would think he had been purchased again. Isolde Thorne sat down at her writing desk and put her face in her hands. And for the first time since her father's carriage had driven her away from her mother's house, she wept. She did not go to him that night. She went to him in the morning, which was harder and braver, and the only thing she could live with. She found him in the library. He was in his chair, his mother's shawl folded across his knees, his face turned toward the gray window. The spaniel lifted her head when Isolde came in, and then, sensing something, laid it down again without a sound. Alaric. Isolde. He knew her step now. He knew it the way other men knew a voice. You are up early. I have to tell you something, and I had to tell you before I lost my courage. Your cousin Mortimer is here to take the house from you. He has been speaking to the servants, to the physician, to the tenants. He means to have the marriage set aside on grounds of non-consummation and the title transferred to himself. She watched the long, careful stillness come down over him. She watched him absorb it. She watched him, with an effort she could see, not clench his hands. I see, he said. I will not let him do it. Isolde, I came to tell you that I know what he wants, and I know what would stop him, and I will not do it tonight. Or tomorrow night. I will not come to you because I am afraid of your cousin. I will not let the first time you touch me be a piece of strategy. You were sold once, Alaric. I will not let you be sold again, not by him, and not by me. He had risen. He had risen without meaning to. She watched him realize he was standing, watched him reach for the back of his chair to steady himself. Then how? He said, very quietly. Do you intend to stop him? With the truth. With every servant in this house who loves you. With Hargrove, who came to me because he could not bear it. With your mother's solicitor, whom I have already sent for. And with myself. I will stand up in any courtroom in England, Alaric, and I will say that I am your wife by choice, not by contract. I will say it until they believe me. Let him try his case. Let him bring his witnesses. I will bring yours. She had not meant to cross the room, but she had crossed it. She was standing in front of him now, close enough to feel the warmth of him, close enough that when his hand came up, searching, it found her face on the first try. Isolde, he said. His thumb passed once across her cheekbone, the way it had that night in the library. Isolde, look at me. I am looking. I love you. He said it like a man setting something heavy down after a long journey. I have loved you since the 8th evening, since you knelt on the carpet and put my hand against your face. I was going to tell you after the funeral. I was going to tell you on a day that was yours, not mine. I am telling you now because if my cousin takes this house from me tomorrow, I will not have told you, and I cannot bear it. Alaric, I do not care about the title. Let him have it. Let him have the house and the lands and every stone of the vault. I care about you. That is all I have learned in 4 years of sitting in the dark. I care about you. She was weeping. She did not try to hide it, because he could feel it on his thumb. Then we will fight him together, she said. Because I want the house, Alaric. I want your name and your library and your spaniel and your 71 men. I want all of it. I want to grow old in your chair by your fire. I am not going anywhere. Do you hear me? I hear you. Say it. You are not going anywhere. He bent his head and kissed her. It was not a careful kiss. It was a kiss that had been waiting 9 weeks to be kissed, and it tasted of grief and of relief and of a great unreasonable hope. And when she put her arms around his neck, he made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob, and gathered her in so tightly she could hear his heart. They fought the cousin in the drawing room 3 days later, and they did not fight him alone. Mrs. Finch stood at the door with her keys. Mr. Hargrove stood at the writing desk with his ledgers. Thomas the groom stood by the window with a letter in his pocket from the colonel of the 43rd, who had ridden through the night to say that his former major had saved his life at Badajoz and would not be called unfit in any room that contained an honest man. The physician who had attended the dowager stood by the hearth. The vicar stood beside him. Lord Mortimer Thorne looked at the semicircle of witnesses ranged against him, and at the thin, plain, unflinching woman standing at her husband's right hand, and he understood, finally, that he had made a mistake about what sort of house this was. He left that afternoon. He did not come back. By summer the gardens at Ravensmere were full of roses again, and the yellow drawing room had lost its dust sheets for good, and Philippa had come from the county for what was meant to be a fortnight and had stayed 3 months, and the spaniel had a puppy, and Isolde was with child. She told him in the library, in her chair, at the end of a long, warm evening. She had been reading Dawn again. She closed the book and set it aside and went to him and took his hand and laid it, very carefully, against the soft curve of her belly where it had begun, only just to round. He did not speak. He bent his head and pressed his forehead to the place his hand had been, and she felt his shoulders move once, not with grief this time, but with something quieter and better. Isolde. Yes. I was counting them again last night. At the window. I know. I heard you. I did not get to 71. No. I got to 40. And then I came back to bed. Because you were in it. And I thought I had counted enough. She put her hand in his hair. Good, she said softly. That is good, my love. Outside, the long summer twilight settled over the lake, silver on pewter on gold. Somewhere in the house a door opened and closed. Philippa's laugh carried up from the terrace below, too loud for drawing rooms, exactly as it ought to be. The spaniel sighed on the rug. The fire, which Mrs. Finch had built up herself, burned low and warm. Isolde Thorne, Duchess of Ravensmere, stood with her husband's head bowed against her belly and thought of a cold gravel drive, and a gate groaning open, and a carriage in which she had promised herself she would not weep. She thought of a woman who had walked into this house expecting a grave and had found, instead, a home. She thought that some marriages began with love, and theirs had begun with a debt, and that the debt had been paid not in cattle or in coin, but in every quiet evening of 8 long months, and that she would not trade a single one of them, not for anything the world contained. She had not flinched. She had come here, and she had not flinched, and the man who had asked that of her had, in the end, not flinched either. That was the whole of the story. That was everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.